Success was pretty much just keeping the doors open, I would say. That's funny, but it's true, like if we had the wherewithal to present 11 months of theater and at the end of it we could open our door for another year and do it again, that would be success.
Welcome, friends. I'm Kristen Merding, and this is Torches. Today we have my dear friend, frequent collaborator, and poker pal, Robert Lyons. Robert is an acclaimed playwright and ran the award-winning Ohio Theater for 30-plus years. I'm very excited to speak with him today. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Glad to be here.
So, how did you come to downtown performance?
I think my first real experience was in Philadelphia, and it was at the Painted Bride. Mm-hmm. And it was Rind Eckhart.
Rindy
Eckhart at the Painted Bride doing some show that I don't remember what it was called, but he was wearing an orange jumpsuit and he had a boombox and he had a shaved head and it was unlike anything I had seen before. I was working at the Wilma Theater, so I was in the theater and they do very interesting, great work. I love the Wilma. But that was the one that I was like, okay, what is this? This is really something different that I'd never seen before. And so that was probably my first engagement with it when I was there.
Awesome.
I would say the next time, after that, I went to London. I worked in London for about a year. Saw a lot of work, but it wasn't quite as downtown. I worked in a small theater in the basement of a bookstore, but it was more scripted plays. Mm-hmm. And but then when I came back to New York, one of the first things I saw was Symphony of Rats,
Richard Foreman
with the Wooster Group. And that was another one where I went like, okay, what is this? This is really crazy. I don't know what it is, but I like it. So those two I remember specifically.
I love it. How did you end up at the Ohio Theater, though?
That's a whole story. That, it's funny, I was thinking about us talking about this because this is a conversation you and I have basically been having for the last 40 years. So, these stories. But I was sleeping on somebody's couch, and they were looking for a production manager, Charlie Oddie, and they were on Worcester Street. And they had just reopened this space that had been closed by the fire department. And my friend Jim Ingalls, whose couch I was on, said, I got this guy on my couch. He could do it. And so I went down and they hired me. And I was a production manager. The company was called Project 3. It was Angel City, Sam Shepard. I met them. And nobody was running the space at that time. And so that company, Project 3, talked to Bill Hahn, the owner of the building, and said, hey, well, we could run your space for you. He said, okay, let's try that. And then I became a member of that company. And then eventually Charlie left and I became the artistic director of that company. And then at that point, I was on a year-to-year deal with Bill Hahn, just like, hey, we'll do it for another year. And he'd say, yeah, we'll do it for another year.
Never any contracts with Bill?
Never had a contract for 25 years. I was on a year-to-year basis. And yeah, it was just kind of a handshake deal. And at a certain point, it was less of a question. I knew we were going to do it unless something happened. So that's how I got to the Ohio Theater. I eventually lived in the building, as you know. We had a rehearsal space, which you ran for a while.
Yes.
Tidy Mythic. But that's how I got there.
Awesome. So I know that a lot of things have influenced you beyond the theater. Could you talk about things that inspired you, whether it's books or news or other non-theatrical sources that have inspired your work?
I kind of feel that almost everything that I take in somehow goes into the work. If I'm reading a book, I'm on some level I'm thinking about, oh, this is interesting. What can I do with this? Or how would this tie into something? Or maybe this is a play or something. Music's similar, especially certain songwriters. I was a big Elvis Costello head for a while, Lyle Lovett, Lucinda Williams, like the great songwriting people. And I'm always looking at their craft and how did they do that and what did they write and how can I learn from that and things like that. So I try to just be open to it. I think it's part of a general, I was thinking about this. I think what motivates me and maybe many artists is just this kind of an ongoing investigation of the world and trying to figure out how to understand the human condition and your own condition in the world and why you are the way you are and why the world is the way it is and how these things interact. And so I think that's kind of the curiosity that drives me and other people. And it all kind of ends up being funneled into the work, basically.
And your work's pretty political, and there's a lot of political commentary and social commentary. Can you talk about why that's important to you?
I think it's related to that same idea. Why is society structured the way it is? Why do we have these political structures and these economic structures? And what are the ramifications? And are they good? Are they bad? Can they be better?
Do you see art's potential to make social change?
I think that I used to. I was thinking about this too. I can remember a early play, Vater Knows Best. I don't know if you remember that. So this is the
I think I did the lighting on that.
No, you did. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you were the lighting designer. That's right. That's right. Which I think was our first collaboration, actually, our first artistic collaboration. So it's Wilhelm Reich's Mass Psychology of Fascism meets Father Knows Best, an episode of Father Knows Best. So that was it. And it was a musical. I can remember thinking, we have to get this production up before the election. As if somehow this production would somehow affect the outcome of the election. So that was in my 20s.
I can't remember what year that was. So what election were you concerned about? Do you remember?
It had to be Reagan because that was the source of
concern.
Well, that's what I thought was fascism back then. We thought that was fascism compared to now. So that kind of direct idea of like, I'm going to make this play and this play is going to have this direct effect and it's going to change the outcome of things that happen in the country. I don't think that way anymore. I've matured. So I think of it more as participating in in a broader conversation with activists, but also with just citizens, basically, and everybody. And I think artists have a role in that conversation, just like everybody else does. And I like to be in that conversation. Those are conversations I like to have with my friends, my artist friends, with everyone. So that's more, I see how art functions politically more than it somehow uniquely drives that conversation. I think it's more, we're in that conversation and, hopefully it helps.
Yeah, and conversation. How did hanging out after shows affect the work you make? With audiences or with other artists?
Yeah. Well, how I actually got into the theater was I was a house painter in Rockport, Massachusetts, a poet, writing poetry and beach bum house painter. And it's a dry town, and I had to hitchhike to go to a bar. I had to hitchhike to go to Gloucester because I didn't have a car. And I did that, and I was going to see some blues band, and I got there early, and instead of having a warm-up band, or, band first, there was a theater, and they did a show as the warm-up for this blues band. Guitar Luther Johnson, I think was the guy's name. And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. I had never studied theater in college. I didn't really go to the theater. Theater wasn't on my radar at all. And but I saw this thing and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. I like this. And then the people who were in it hung out afterwards to hear the band. And so I went over to them and I was like, hey, I liked your play and blah, blah, blah. And so I started hanging out with them. And I thought, oh, I like these people. It's interesting. They're smart. It's fun. We had a good time. We danced. And so I hitchhiked home that night. And I had a short story I was working on. And I changed it into a play. I put it into dialogue form. And that's how I got into the theater. So it was actually hanging
did that
out.
theater company produce that play?
No, I never saw those people again ever. I have no idea whatever happened to them. But so my way into the theater was actually hanging out after a show with theater people. That got me interested. So I think that's certainly, as you know, is a big part of what I like to do. I was thinking of Prince Street Bar all those years. So we're on Worcester and Spring and Worcester, and Prince Street is in Worcester, and how we would, whatever, after the show, 10, 15, 20 people would just all go to the bar after the show or after rehearsal or whatever.
And sometimes we would see Richard Foreman or other people from the Wooster group at that time because the garage was just a block further down the street.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then we knew all the people who worked there because they were all theater artists, and so it was like it was our own private after-hours club.
And some of
After-show
those
club.
people were your board members at the Ohio.
Are currently my board members. Chris Dickey, who was the bartender, who's now a world traveling health expert, but at the time he's still on my board.
Right.
So, and many good friends I have from that period. So that was definitely part of the whole structure of being at the theater, as the Tiny Mythic years and then beyond. The other very specific memory I had about that was participating in the Václav Havel Festival that Untitled Theater did. I directed a show in that festival, and Havel came to it. He was there with his wife and his little entourage and his security people or whatever. And after the show, they hung out. And we were, he went up to the concession bar at the barn doors, those famous barn doors. And I was like, hey, let me buy you a beer. And he's like, oh, okay. So I bought him a beer, and then we're standing there drinking a beer in that barn door. And he starts telling me about this play that he was working on. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm like just hanging out with fucking Havel, talking about plays that we're working on, like a couple of playwrights. So that's a golden memory.
Awesome. You've done a lot of risky work over the years, both your own and work you curate. How do you deal with that risk, and what happens when you run into failure?
What is a risk, right? Like for an artist. And I think at first my mind went more like it's risky, like will people like it? Does it work? Does it, and so that I think that's one kind of risk.
Right.
I think that the other kind of risk that I was thinking about is just whatever form you're working on, whatever the project is working just beyond what you actually understand yourself about what you're doing and what choices, even the choices you're making, so that you're not just planning everything out and executing it, that you're constantly in this space that you can't really explain, and you're not sure why you're making those choices, but they feel right. And I think that's a kind of vulnerability in that space, and that's the risk, that's the internal risk that an artist takes about trusting those impulses and that way of getting going beyond what you already know, and trusting that it's getting that that other people can relate to it, even if you can't explain it. And so that kind of risk is exhilarating, and I think is very much built into the process of theater, because every artist, if you're lucky, every artist on your team is doing that.
Yeah.
And so you collectively create this space that can't be completely identified or explained, that you're all sharing, that nobody really, has a complete handle on, and that's where you trust each other. That's, that's where the trust comes in. And like that kind of risk taking is the main thing that I love about theater, actually. That both the individual as an artist, but then that collective risk taking. And I'm not even getting into forms or content or,
Right.
non-narrative or whatever. I'm just like, that's just the general act of collective creation that has that risk built into it. So I don't know. That's what I was thinking about.
Great. So, how do you balance making your own work and curating other people's work? Because it's tricky to do those two things at the same time.
As you know very well, this conversation we've been having for about 40 years, I think. How do I deal with that? I think that I do curate, festivals and programming and stuff like that, and seasons. So I don't, I don't want to pretend that I don't. At the other hand, I feel like I try to do that with a very light touch. I feel like I try to just be open to people who come to me and have ideas and are excited or come recommended by other people and say, hey, these are good people. I can remember when you came into the office when you just thought of NYU, and I had just inherited that space, and I was just trying to what am I going to do with this space? I've got this huge space, and I have to fill it up with something. And you came in, and you and Tim and Francine came in, and you're like, we're Tiny Mythic, and we want to do 3 shows a year for the next 3 years. And, and I was like, great. I was so happy to meet you. Please do that.
I think it was 1,200 a week our first season.
1,200 a week. Yeah.
That's what I vaguely remember.
That sounds.
And
high.
I think we were doing each show only for 2 weeks then.
Right.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think that I try to when I think about curating, I think about it more as trying to I have some resource, either the space or some resources that I'm trying to share with other artists. And so it's less about, which artist should I give it to, and more about who wants it on one hand. And then of course, once you build up relationships, then, then that's how at one point on Worcester Street, I can remember we would, it was like New George's and International Wow and Club Thumb and Mai and Melanie Joseph and and it would be like every year we'd just be like, okay, how many weeks are you looking for? And they'd say, oh, I want 3 weeks in the fall and 2 weeks in the spring,
Right.
And then everybody would put it in, and then we'd go, and my role was to just manage the calendar. Okay, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And then everybody would say, yeah, and then we'd lock in
Right.
85% of the season. So I didn't think of that as as curation. That was more like I had informal resident companies in residency, and I was just in the role of accommodating, trying to make everybody happy with what we could do. So that again, there was a form of curation, but the best part is when you get past that and you actually just develop long-term relationships with companies and artists, and then you just go back to them over and over again because you like it.
Yeah.
It's because it's fun.
Collaboration has always been a big part of your art making.
Yeah.
What makes a vibrant or generative collaboration for you? And how's your work evolved through the different collaborations?
I mean, part of this I already touched on because just that act of collaboration being,
Right.
This kind of risk, this collective risk that people take. But I've collaborated many times with you. So you're a key collaborator. I don't know how many projects we've done, like 5 or 6 or something, maybe. I think each one has its own dynamic. You know, we were very much well. We did. There's kind of two parts of it. One was the Dostoevsky stuff and Changeling and that stuff, where we were really adapting literature, and we were doing that together, and we were doing that like word to word by word. You know, collectively.
Right.
You know, like just sitting there carving out language and structure and all that stuff together. You know, nuts and bolts. From the book directly, I can remember the books, you know, with the
Right.
back when it was, you know, Post-its
Yes.
and highlights and pens, and we'd had this book.
And
that
even
was,
ripping pages out.
yeah, and then lay them on the floor and all of that. So that was one kind of process. It was very specific. Then we also did the other times you brought me on a couple projects where I was one of a team of writers, where I was with another writer with Kui. And that was very different. That, you know, that felt much more like, you know, I don't mean this like a gun for hire kind of thing, you know, like I was happy that you invited me. I was happy to be part of it, but it wasn't like I was at the core of the origin of the idea. And so I was entering into a process that already had a structure and already had ideas and already had people. And so that felt very different. I've been doing a lot of collaborating now with Daniel Irizarry in the last 3 projects, and that's completely different. You know, I just write the text. It's kind of more poetic, post-dramatic, political text, and then he says, "Okay, are you done?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he takes it and runs with it and does his craziness with it. I'm still in the room, I'm still in the process, but it's a different, you know, it's much more clearly delineated in terms of like, I did this, and if I have something to say about the text, that's it. And yeah, he likes to, for my feedback on what he's doing in terms of theatrically. I'm also a director, and so I have a lot of opinions, as you know, about that. And I always share those opinions, which I always did with you, whether you liked it, you know, whether you took them or not. It was always your discretion, but you know, I always had a lot of opinions about what's happening on stage. And so that's similar. So those are 2 just very different ways. But I like both of them, and they have very different outcomes. You know, the kind of work is completely different.
How has your identity and or lived experience affected your aesthetic?
I think that my lived experience, and it's kind of threading through this whole story as I'm talking, which is, you know, I was very lucky to find myself having that theater on Worcester Street in a very bizarre, no contracts, but also no financial pressure from the landlord. So, you know, but we had no money, but we had space and we had permission. And the kind of people who were interested in that space were like you and Tiny Mythic, but also the companies that were downtown theater companies loved that space because it was so funky and beautiful and
Yeah, it was a magical
so
space.
much character. Right, it was special. That's who was attracted to it. So that's who I was like, great, you know, let's come in and do work here. And so, you know, I was sat there for 25, you know, now 30 plus years, but with just a stream of downtown theater artists coming through the space, trying everything you can think of. And I think that clearly affected my aesthetic
And your own art
and
making.
how and what work, you know, inspired me and what work I tried to rip off, you know, or was, you know, you know, different ideas and approaches. And I was very lucky to have a pretty constant stream of it in my life. So I think that's
Right.
more than, yeah, I think that's what's.
A lot of institutions have a hard time with experimentation, but you really embraced experimentation despite the pressures of capitalism and commodification. What recommendations would you have for those institutions to embrace that more?
Yeah. I feel like I never really institutionalized the Ohio Theater. in a couple of senses. But one, I have a 501c3, so that was true. And so that makes you I don't know, makes you a corporation, not an
Right.
institution.
Right.
I had to have a board of directors in order to have that. So I had 3 people. And at one point, it was like me and my brother-in-law and somebody else, Chris Dickey, I don't know. But it was just to fulfill, the minimum requirement in order
Right.
to have this legal entity so you could collect donations and,
Yeah.
and get grants,
Yeah.
basically. And that's pretty much as far as I went down that road. Now, eventually I had to, 20 years later, I had to have more people on the board primarily because foundations would say to me, how come you have 3 people on your board, and how come your board's not raising you any money? And,
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay. So I took that walk. I took the shortest version of that walk that I could to satisfy
The
funders.
requirements.
Yeah, and that was it. So, and then I stopped, and I think that in that decision was a conscious decision. I was conscious that that I was going to stay small, and that was a consequence of doing it that way, and I was okay with that. And so by kind of, again, I had 20 years of that funky Worcester Street, no lease, living in the building, super the building. It was a barter system that was essentially off the books.
Right.
Is how I lived for a long time, and that doesn't institutionalize.
Right.
People you can't explain that on a grant application. So I got used to it that way, and I liked it. So what was the question?
The question was about experimental practices against
So-
capitalism. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I stayed out of that institutionalized point of view, and that's how I did it. So you did it in a different way. You did create a structure, but then you embraced the experimental work, and you just got people on your board that embraced it, and you built up, this beautiful, amazing institution here. But that was so baked into your DNA from the beginning, I think as a founder, you founded it based on that principle, and then everything grew out of that, and people that you attracted for that reason. So if I was thinking about an institution that already exists, I think the fundamental question was, is that in their DNA or not?
Interesting.
And and if it's not, then you got to figure out how to put it into your DNA and then attract people that would support it. Because if it's not, it's not going to work.
As the guy who is anti-institution, what would you change about institutions to make it worth your while?
I would get rid of the board of directors.
Uh-huh.
That would be my main
Why?
thing. Because this is me personally. I had, when I had Project 3, that first company, right? And I became the artistic director of and there was an existing board.
Right.
And I can remember going into those board meetings, and they were very nice people who were supporting downtown theater, so I have nothing against them. But structurally, the idea that I was in the theater every day, all day, and then I was coming in and I was reporting to people who were business people, who probably thought about the theater, a couple hours before the board meeting, and then had the authority to sign off on whatever I was presenting or not.
Right.
Like structurally, that didn't work for me.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't handle it.
It's borrowed from for-profit business. It has nothing to do with a nonprofit activity.
I agree, and to the degree that it does, I think it's a statement that they're saying, yeah, artists are great, but you can't really trust them with the money. So we're going to put some adults in the room and put them on top of the power structure, right? Because like you bring somebody on your board and you're the artistic director, you have one vote on your board, and so do they, right? Suddenly, your power structure is like your two equals, even if you built the thing for 30 years and this person showed up 6 months ago. And I think it's built into the whole funding thing, which is the foundations like to know that there's some like non-artists running it because we trust them more because, artists are somehow irresponsible or don't know how to do things. And I just completely reject that. And you're living proof of it, and I try to be. That we know how to run a business, right? We know how to balance a budget. We've done it. But so I think that structure is actually part of the problem. I don't know, I don't know if it's co-op structures or limited liability structures or what other possible. The only reason you need the board is exactly what I was saying is because of the 501c3.
Right.
So it's a tax thing.
Yeah.
But I don't, and then it gets, and then the funders buy into that, and then you have to do it. So it
Right.
imposes a structure on what artists, how artists can collect and form their own structures. No, you have to actually use this
Right.
tax structure that then brings in certain kinds of power structures and control structures. So that's what I would do.
Thank you. How did you define success when you were running an organization that was devoted to risk taking? What was success?
Success was pretty much just keeping the doors open, I would say. That's funny, but it's true, like if we had the wherewithal to present 11 months of theater and at the end of it we could open our door for another year and do it again, that would be success. I think, and the way, then of course, I would say the next thing is are people coming to see it? Right? Would probably be the next thing I would be looking at. And that may or may not, there's a lot of factors that come into play there, like, and then we get into press, but also word of mouth and community. If you have roots in the community, like I just remember we all knew each other's work. We were all seeing each other's work. It was because there was a community of artists that was interested in what the other artists in the community were doing. And we're only filling up 99-seat theaters,
Right.
We're not selling 1,500 seats a performance or something, right?
Right.
And so it's a relatively small community that you can get in the door. You're not going from, at least the work I think of and then what I know of from you is just like, we're not, we're not trying to have a TV show that gets 15 million viewers. We're trying to get a show that gets 20, 2,000 people in over the course of a run, and that could be a very successful run because of the people who come in and see it, and whether it's talked about, and whether other artists are coming up to you and say, "Oh, that was so interesting. I love that."
Right.
Or, I want to work with you, or do you want to work with me? Look, come see my work. So I think that downtown community functioned that way. I don't know to the same degree that it functions like that now. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm in my own life cycle.
Yes.
So I was young and I was doing that, and that's how I lived. I don't live that way the same way, and I assume that there are other young people that are living that way and functioning that way, but
Right.
I'm not in that.
There were a lot of spaces that came up in the 90s, but we haven't had that kind of explosion since. Why do you think that is, and what's changed?
Well, I think real estate changed.
Yeah, for sure.
That's probably the biggest thing. Cost of living in the city changed. We used to, I know you worked at an art gallery.
Yeah, you'd sometimes come in while I was working at the gallery and we'd work on the show,
On the show.
because
Well,
nobody ever
right,
came into the
because
gallery.
we were just hanging out there and working. I definitely remember that. I had this very idiosyncratic situation. I don't think those are, I don't think those happen anymore. I mean, it was idiosyncratic at its time.
Yeah.
It's kind of thinkable at this
Now,
time
right.
that would have existed. Certainly in Manhattan, let alone in Soho
Yeah.
or Lower Manhattan. But I do. I think that I really actively try to avoid thinking like, well, yeah, it was so much better then, because I think the people who were before us thought it was better before we got here. And now, yeah, everybody thinks like, oh, the golden age was my age, and then the new thing is not as good, right? That's a natural human point of view, and I don't want to participate in that. I do think that New York is still the mecca. Everybody comes here. Creative artists come here. Schools unleash another generation every semester. Every year is another bunch of young people with a lot of ideas and a lot of energy, and I have to believe that that's constantly churning, even if I'm not at the center of it, like maybe I was at some point.
So you were talking about aging before in your life cycle. How do you work against our culture's celebration of the new over seasoned artists?
I don't know, other than my own solution, which is to just keep making the work. I have a new thing called a new piece called Bad Money that hopefully we'll be workshopping at Mercury store. I'm talking to La Mama about another piece, Puzzling Evidence, for next fall. So I'm still creating this work and looking for collaborators, and now I'm looking for spaces, so I feel the irony of being on the other side of the table now, and I'm pitching my ideas to people, and they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds good, but, we're booked through 2027. And I'm like, oh, that's a long time from now, But my solution is just to keep making the work and hope somebody finds it,
What
interesting.
made you decide to close the Ohio when you did?
I think there were a number of forces at play when that happened. One was my own. Yeah, it was 30 plus years I'd been doing it, and I think that in some way I hit the wall. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And again, I don't mean the part about making theater, because I'm still doing that. But that getting on that, now it sounds bad, like that treadmill of, like, oh, you got to keep this going, and you've done it, and, and I felt like, this should really be somebody who's bringing the same kind of energy to it that I was bringing it to, before. So I think I just got like, hey, I'm done. And again, I'm talking just administrative grant cycles and hiring cycles and all that stuff. So I got tired of that. I think that I could see the writing on the wall in terms of our finances. Going back, I was staying small, and so I was staying agile. And COVID came. We were closed for 16 months. We were closed, which is just kind of unbelievable when you actually think about that. That a company would close for 16 months and then reopen. I think the funding world was shifting. I could see that, and I was nearing the end, and I was like, I don't want to spend the last year or last years just worrying about money, chasing money to keep my doors open.
Yeah.
And that's not how I wanted to spend my time. So there was that. I think I had because the space on Christopher Street is a set aside and continued as a theater, and continues as a theater now. It was a little bit easier for me because I didn't feel like I was taking a existing downtown theater off the map. I was taking my theater off the map. New Ohio Theater was closing. I know that people, were sad about that, and the Miss Ice Factory and Archive Residency and all that stuff. But the physical space is still there. As a theater, it just had Out of the Box Theatricals was there for a couple of years under Shishama. Shishama's now re-putting that back on the market in a new way. So that physical space stayed, and I think that helped me, that I wasn't like, oh, there's one less theater in Manhattan. It's just one, there's still that same theater, which we gutted and built out. And I was just there recently, and I was like, yeah, I like this place. I did with your buddy Kyle Chapoulis, a big part of that. So it still exists, and shows are happening there, and I think that made it easier for me to close my theater without closing the theater.
Yeah. What kind of legacy do you hope that your work leaves for audiences, for artists?
Yeah. It's a question that I, I absolutely didn't entertain the entire time I was doing the work. This wasn't something that ever drove me or that I ever thought about. And I, I'm working on a book about that period for Siegel Center, and so I'm looking back, and I'm trying to really I am struck at just the sheer volume of work that went through the space that I participated in, either as because it was in my theater or it was in a programming we were doing or whatever. Just like the volume of it is kind of staggering.
Yeah.
I never thought of that when it was happening. It had nothing to do with my day-to-day thinking. I was just like, what is the next thing? You do the next thing, you do the next thing. What's next? What's next? That's a very New York, drum beat. Well, what are you doing now? What's next? So it's only in retrospect that I even kind of took in the magnitude of this body of theater that I participated in some way. That said, what the legacy of that is, I think is maybe for other people to say. I don't know about that. For myself as an artist, I would have said the similar thing, but then I did have a collection of my plays published by Mercer Street Books. It was very satisfying. I was really happy.
Right.
And it was like, hey, that's just some marker. It's in the Library of Congress, this exists. And I've written 30 plays, but 6 of them are published in this book, and they're an official thing, and you can find it and buy it or not. But so that was the closest I came to, really being like, oh, I'm really glad that happened. I'm really glad there's some official documentation that I wrote plays. I mean, there's New York, there's New York Times reviews. I mean, there's reviews and stuff. You can find it all, but just that little gathering was very meaningful to me.
We're in a really tough time in this country. What role do you think artists can play or should play in this moment?
Yeah, I think I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying before. Is just I think we don't have a unique role, but we have an important role. I think that, there's something we're talking about fear and, that's how do we get through the fear and things, and that takes courage, and I think that there's courage in all fields, and takes courage to be a elementary school teacher or a nurse or any of a number, scientist, so I think that's found across across all of humanity, basically, and where arts fits into it is just as one element of that conversation. This is like a little bit of a sidebar, but there's the big issues in the arts right now is how do artists survive, right? How do you pay them a living? How can they live? And the things they need to live, they need affordable housing, they need guaranteed income, and they need access to health care. And those are things that are way bigger than the theater industry, right? Those are fundamental things that everybody needs, and to really thrive and be in a position to self-actualize or whatever. So I think that anything that anybody does toward bringing those three things, into reality are doing important work and are helping the artists, because there's in that sense the needs of an artist are not unique. They're just the same thing everybody needs.
Yeah. How about a moment of pure joy in your art making?
There's many of them, but I'm just going to say the one that happened most recently.
Great.
Which is I spend time upstate, in a town called Pine Plains. And there's a woman up there, Grace Dietrich, and she's 93 years old. She volunteers at the local art center. I got to know her, and she said, "Robert, when are you going to write a play for me?" And I said, "Okay, I'll write a play for you." She's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll do that." And so I did. And I had a slot. They had a play reading series up there, so I had like until May, whatever. I had 6 months or something, and I had a reading. I already had a slot saved for myself, but I didn't. I had an idea for a play. So I wrote this play and the lead character is like a 93-year-old woman, and it's a crazy story. She's fallen down. She's in her bedroom. She can't get up, and then this whole fever dream happens in the room with her. And God Orion comes in the window, and her tenant turns into a zombie, and the guy digging the septic tank turns into the Grim Reaper, and so it's this whole fever dream that this woman is having. And but it's set up. This is a long story, but it's set up at the beginning of the play. They sing "Are the Stars Out Tonight?" I Only Have Eyes for You. I had 3 musicians in the group, and they sing that. That's a pre-show. And then at the climax of the show, the god Orion asks the woman if to dance, and he dances with her, and he sings that song to her, and then the rest of the cast gets the audience, and the entire audience. So the place is packed, and the whole town is there, and they all sing "I Only Have Eyes for You" to Grace, this
The
93-year-old woman on stage. And that was pure joy. Yeah, that was a really special moment.
That sounds beautiful.
That was pretty great.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Okay, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to HowlRound for hosting us, and we hope you'll come back to more of Torches.